we kick this segment off with a joke. Another Canadian joke, this time a joke in the Canadian media. Okay, so here's how it goes. A news organization called Global News Viewer is shouting from the rooftops about what it calls a huge investigation into foreign interference by India, a story that will expose India's evil designs and obsessive interference with all things Canadian. Well, imagine my disappointment when I found that this Global News exclusive investigation was a bunch of case studies of the Indian consulate in Vancouver denying visas to Canadians suspected or proven to be associated with the so-called Khalistani cause. With hilarious, righteous indignation by two journalists, the article in Global News says the cruel Indian consulate in Vancouver has been making visas conditional on these applicants distancing themselves from the so-called Khalistani cause and or acknowledging India as their country of origin, etc., etc. I mean, I know, right? What's wrong with that? Sounds totally legitimate, totally reasonable, totally appropriate. If you're like me, you're probably thinking, that's it? I mean, here's a big white nation's media lecturing India about visa denial to a bunch of Canadian citizens who voluntarily associated themselves with a cause that involves terrorism, violent threats, active bounties on Indian officials and citizens, threats to airlines, threats to events here in India, and so much more. We've covered all of it if you've been watching India Today. Canadian citizens who've participated in protests and agitations that involve violence against other citizens and the display of violent material depicting the assassination of Indian politicians like Indira Gandhi. Canadian citizens caught up with groups involved in gun running, drug trafficking, human trafficking, and much worse. Canadian citizens who want the luxury of embracing an anti-India terrorist ideology but still want the privilege of an Indian visa. Wow! To come to this country and enjoy the benefits that this country provides. I told you it was a joke. Am I missing something? If this Global News report is accurate, then I have to admit that I am very, very proud of the Indian government's Canadian policy. This protocol of visa denial, if true, is not just a matter of national pride, but a necessary step to safeguard the sovereignty and security of our nation. For too long, extremist voices have threatened the integrity of India, and it's high time we drew a line in the sand. Let us once again take a moment to reflect on the remarkable irony of the Canadian media describing this act as foreign interference, as though a sovereign nation safeguarding its borders and interests constitute meddling. Actually, I personally shouldn't be surprised at all, given that my takes here on 5 Live have been described as foreign interference by the Canadian government itself. This paranoia about foreign interference would be almost amusing if it wasn't so misplaced. After all, Canada, while it is a lovely country with breathtaking landscapes and polite citizens, is not exactly at the center of global geopolitics. I mean, one might wonder if they truly believe the world spends its time obsessing over Canada's affairs, when in reality most countries have far more pressing concerns than even acknowledging Canada. And finally, denying visas is a significant step, but it cannot be the only one, and I shall go ahead and say it. The Indian government must tighten the screws further. They must do more than deny visas to Khalistanis. Those who use their overseas citizens of India or person of Indian origin, OCI or PIO card status, to undermine this country should have those privileges revoked. Their properties and bank accounts in India, if any, must also be frozen or confiscated to send a clear, unequivocal, unambiguous message. India will not provide sanctuary, access or comfort to anyone threatening India's unity and integrity. This is not just a policy, it's a principle. India is a land of pluralism and diversity, but our tolerance cannot be mistaken for weakness. By taking these alleged decisive actions, because we don't know for sure, we have to go by what the very unreliable Canadian Global News has said, we affirm that while we welcome all voices of peace, we will never bow to those of violence and division embraced by the Trudeau government.